There are some who have raised an objection that, sometimes what happens is that if you made a mistake yesterday, 2 small mistakes, so what you do is next day, there's some huffaz, at the beginning they read just those verses, one verse from, 1 quarter, and then they start today's. Like, what are you doing? They wonder, like, why are you bringing these little verses and then you're reading today's juz or something. And they think that that's bid'ah or something. However, and I'm going to mention this because a lot of people don't know about this. According to Majmu' al-Fatawa, there's a whole discussion on this there. He says that قد كانوا بمكة يوكلون رجلا يكتب ما ترك الإمام من الحروف وغيرها فإذا كان ليلة الختمة أعاده. That in Mecca, meaning somebody should correct what they've made as a mistake, like a little verse and a mistake in there, because in Mecca they had actually appointed a guy to sit on the side or not necessarily sit, but after he's a hafid, if he couldn't take the mistake wasn't taken out, he would actually write down the mistakes. And then on the night of the 27th, 29th, whenever they're finishing the Qur'an, they would actually go through all of them first. You don't want to do that. That would be a lot to go through, most likely, right? And then you only make one mistake. So try to do it by the next day or the next Rakaats. So that's there. And also, from the Hanbalis, it says that قال الأصحاب كأبي محمد, Abu Muhammad, he says وإنما استحب ذلك لتتم الختمة ويكمل الثواب. This is mustahab to repeat and finish off those small verses, just so the khatam, meaning the completion of the Qur'an, can be finished and the reward be fully received. فقد جعل أهل مكة وأحمد وأصحابه إعادة المنسي من الآيات وحده يكمل الختم والثواب وإن كان قد أخل بالترتيب هنا. That the people of Mecca, Imam Ahmad and his colleagues and his students, they said that you should repeat the forgotten parts separately to complete the Qur'an and the khatam, even though it does spoil and disrupt the arrangement, right? Because next day you're reading something else and you're just taking a verse from the beginning of yesterday's juz, for example. It does do that a bit, but that's fine. And he says that this is what has been transmitted from Ali radiallahu anhu, أنه نسي آية من سورة. He once forgot a verse, missed a verse from one surah. ثم في أثناء القراءة, in the middle of his qira'ah, in the middle of his reading, he repeated it. وعاد إلى موضعه, and then he went back to repeating, to reading where he was originally. Mostly people won't know because they're not hafiz, they don't know what's going on, right? But he said you should do that. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, من قام رمضان إيمانا واحتسابا غفر له ما تقدم من ذنبه. Which basically means that whoever stands during the nights of Ramadan with iman, with faith, otherwise why else would you stand? With faith and ihtisab, which basically means with anticipation for something, whatever you want, anticipation for reward, for closeness, for forgiveness, for blessing, for barakah, then your previous sins are forgiven. So in the nights of Ramadan, while we fast during the days, in the nights the very special thing is to stand in prayer. That's where Taraweeh comes in. So there's a history of Taraweeh that the Prophet ﷺ, it's reported that he did it for 1 or 2 days. And then they found out the Prophet ﷺ was reading at night, performing prayer at night, and they said, can we pray with you? So they were waiting for him, and he didn't come out until suhoor time, closer to Fajr time. And he said, the reason is that I didn't want this to be obligated upon you. If Taraweeh had become an obligation like a fard, then that would have been a lot more complicated. So the Prophet ﷺ definitely did Taraweeh, and that's been reported. However, exactly how he did it, how many rakats he done, there's different narrations mentioned there. It was during Umar radiallahu anhu's time when everything had kind of calmed down. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu's time was full of turmoil. After the Prophet ﷺ passed away, there were different tribes, different people in different areas
who came up and some denied Islam fully. They reneged on Islam. They became disbelievers. Some said, we're going to be Muslim, but we're not going to give zakat, for example. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu's 2 years and 4 or 5 months was spent just trying to quell all the rebellions and bring back the stability. Then it was in the Umar radiallahu anhu's time where he managed to reconcile and he managed to sort a lot of things out. So he would have a committee and he would essentially see all of the different narrations, because one Sahabi said one thing, another Sahabi had remembered another thing from the Prophet ﷺ. So finally, he went into the masjid one day and he saw different people, different groups of people doing Taraweeh prayer, different people doing Taraweeh prayer. He said, I need to get everybody onto one platform. So then he got one of the Sahaba to lead, and then he made everybody onto the 20 Rakaats. A few days later or something, when he came back and he looked at it and everybody was calmly praying together, the 20 Rakaats and the one Imam, he said this is what he was looking for essentially. So since then, pretty much that's what we had throughout the world, including in the Haram until a few days ago when they switched it to 10 Rakaats, which is a whole new idea of 10 Rakaats. I'm glad it wasn't 8. It was 10 Rakaats, and they're still doing 10 Rakaats apparently. I don't know how long they're going to do that for. But that essentially, we've had Taraweeh since then. Last year, or actually probably, was it last year or the year before? Yeah, 2 years ago, in 2020, we probably had the most Taraweeh Jama'ats, congregations ever to be held in our history. 2020 was probably, and 2021, there were probably never as many Taraweeh Jama'ah and congregations held in the world at any time in our history. Why? Because the Muslim population has spread and has expanded, about nearly 2 billion or something. Never had that many Muslims, because the whole world's population was 2 billion until a few centuries ago. So 2 billion nearly Muslims doing Taraweeh prayers at home, because they weren't done in the masjids, or they weren't so many, and everybody couldn't pray in the masjid. So that's why we had so much Taraweeh, mashallah. That's when people got an opportunity to do Taraweeh at home, probably for the first time. Lots of women did Taraweeh. I don't think there's ever been so many people ever done Taraweeh as 2-3 years ago. Anyway, things are getting back to normal now. And but mashallah, increasingly, alhamdulillah, especially in our communities, we have lots of huffaz. And what you have to understand, the brothers who are sitting in front of me and who are listening online, is that you are becoming an imam. I mean, I know becoming an imam sounds like this really big deal. Like, when am I going to become an imam? But when you do Taraweeh, you are an imam. Right? You are leading prayers. And you're usually leading prayers of a lot of people. Close to Jumu'ah. Your local imam probably doesn't lead as many people in normal prayers, because you get more people for Taraweeh and Jumu'ah. So that's a massive honor, isn't it? That you're leading all of these Muslims of your area, people who are older than you, right? People in different positions. And mashallah, you are leading all of them in prayer. That's why you're an imam. Imam means leader. Now, in anything, if you're a leader, it's an honor usually, right? Leadership is seen as an honor by a lot of people, but we have to really look at it as a responsibility as well. Because in the honor of being a leader, you don't become a leader just to show off, right? That's not really part of it. It's to lead, which means that you're taking everybody somewhere. And what you're doing in Taraweeh is you're petitioning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you get to read the Qur'an and offer it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everybody else is listening. Because if I go with a group of people to petition somewhere, we're not all going to speak at once, are we? It's not a protest, is it? Where everybody shouts, right? It's a petition. It's a question. It's a plea. So you're the imam, mashallah. You're putting the plea to Allah on behalf of your whole congregation, and they are trusting you to do that. What I'm trying to tell you is that it's not just an honor, but it's a massive responsibility, because within an honor there's a responsibility. And what is that responsibility? If I'm the one that they've chosen to lead people, and I've got some fundamental issues going on, right, that I could have done better at, but I'm not, and then that's found out, or even if it's not found out, there's going to be weakness in my petition. I'm not the best leader in that sense. Now, I don't want you all to get a bit paranoid about that and say, we're not doing Taraweeh this year because we don't think we're the best people to do that, right? it's an honor. If you have the Qur'an, mashallah, you got the qualification, at least the major qualification of that. And then the other things are easy. It's more difficult to memorize the Qur'an than all the other stuff I'm probably going to tell you to do, because you can easily do that. So it's an absolutely great honor. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it, because it's only a fraction of the world, fraction of the Muslims that have the Qur'an by heart and that can lead the prayers. Can you believe it? And you know what an honor it is? In the early days of Islam, there was a tribe. They were not Muslim yet, but they were on the road to where the Prophet ﷺ was. So when people used to pass by, they were like a service station village. So people would come by, they would go and meet the Prophet ﷺ, come back, stop there, and there was a little 7-8-year-old child, Ibn Salama, I can't remember the exact name, and he used to, all those that were coming back, he used to ask them what they heard from the Prophet ﷺ. And whatever, remember the Qur'an took about 23 years to be revealed. So whatever Qur'an that somebody came now and said, oh, I heard this verse from the Prophet ﷺ, he would memorize it. When the next lot of people would come and bring a new verse, he would memorize it. His tribe finally became Muslim. So the Prophet ﷺ said that the most learned of you in the Qur'an, the one who knows the most Qur'an, must lead your prayer. And there was nobody who knew more Qur'an than him. And he was only 7, 8 or 9 years old, very young. Right? The hadith is in Sahih Muslim. So he got to lead the prayer. He's a little kid, literally. He's not even baling. Now, you can't do that today. I'll explain later. But he got to lead the prayer. And they were a poor family. So he only had a garment. And the women used to pray behind as well. And they started complaining. They said that, or they gave him some advice. They said that you need to cover your Imamat properly. Because when he goes into ruku or sujood, then some part of his body becomes uncovered because he's got only one garment that he owns. He's not purposely bought these small garments where you show everything and you purposely put your trousers down to show some part of your back. It wasn't one of those things. It wasn't a style thing. It was just what he needed. Right? He didn't have any more than that. So they did a fundraiser for him. And they bought new garments for him. And he said, wow, that was one of the happiest days that I got new garments. Barakah of the Qur'an. Right? I don't want you doing anything like that. Right? So that people do a fundraiser for us. We need to cover ourselves up properly. We need to look the part of an Imam. I know we may only be 15, 16 when you're doing your first Taraweeh, right? But we need to look because there's a responsibility. And the other thing is that, as you know, with our community, we have people who like to criticize. So one is you could say, well, I don't care about these people. But then we do have whenever you're in a position, you need to mitigate, which means you need to minimize problems. Why would you want to do something and go up there with for example, big logoed tops or something like that, for example, right? And then just have people telling you this, that and the other. You don't want that hassle. Tarawih is already massively stressful. Just getting it right in front of everybody with all those people behind you. You don't want any additional stress. So you want to try to be the optimal part because you are presenting yourself in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we're not doing it to show. You might be a good reciter and you just can't wait to, mashallah, just cause those echoes to reverberate around the masjid and people just to start, zooming around and, with your recitation. But that's not the purpose of it. Right? The purpose of it is, think of it this way. If I'm standing here to lead the prayer, there's people behind me, right? And in front of me, I'm praying to Allah. Allah is not physically, we don't believe Allah is physically in any location, but the idea is that we're praying towards the Qibla. So we are praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, if I'm praying, I'm supposed to be praying for Allah. I am leading people. I am concerned about them. But if I'm fully focused on them that I need to read in this way that they just get excited, they just get so excited and, they start getting intoxicated in prayer with my recitation, then I'm losing the focus. Then I'm not going to get reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. My petition to Allah, my offering to Allah, my devotion to Allah, I'm not the right leader. My focus is my followers. I need to focus on Allah first. The beautiful thing is that if you just focus on Allah, and that just means keep your concentration on Allah. Keep your concentration of Allah. If you're praying for Allah, it doesn't mean you're going to read badly, are you? You read good for Allah, so you can still read well. But when you're reading for Allah, there's a certain emotion that's involved in that. And that way, people are going to be pleased anyway. But at least you've gotten Allah. You've pleased Allah, and you've put everybody's case forward. You've given the devotion. You've led people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's important. If you keep Allah in mind, people are going to enjoy it anyway. And if you only are focused on people's enjoyment or people's excitement, happiness, then you literally don't have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your mind. So it's not worth it. The one way to Allah gives you both, whereas if you focus on people, you only get one thing. Right, so mashallah, we are standing in the nights of Taraweeh, 20 rakats mashallah, and we are leading the prayer. What an honor that is. You know, it's an honor to just do it yourself. But then to have to lead the prayer, what a bigger honor, because you know what? You get the reward for everybody who prays behind you. You get the reward for everybody who prays behind you, because you're leading them in prayer. And in Islam, whatever shows a way, whoever leads a way, they get the reward of everybody that is being led. So you're getting much more reward than reading alone. Have you ever thought about that? That's something very, very important. And the bigger the masjid, probably the greater your reward. Or the tougher the masjid, the greater your reward. Right? Because, you know, our rewards are increased by the difficulty, not purposeful difficulty. You don't create difficulties, but if there is a difficulty, like let's just say there's a place that there's no Imam. They don't have anybody for Taraweeh, and it'll be a bit of a hassle for you to go there. That would be superior, probably more rewarding than to just do it locally where it's so much more comfortable, whereas they can find other people. You'd rather give that place to somebody else and you go somewhere else. Right? So all of these things matter. So now this is the way we're going to do this. We only have a short amount of time. I've broken this down into several segments. Then I'm going to open it up for questions, because I don't think I can incorporate everything right in this presentation. So if there's still questions left, please write them down now, and then feel free to ask them at the end, both for the online brothers and sisters and for you guys who are here. So firstly, we're going to go through some practical advices, just in general practical advices relating to some of the things that I've been talking about already, and about memorizing and preparing and so on. Then I've got about 21 points in there. Then we're going to talk about some of the masail, the fiqh related stuff, that which could mess up our Taraweeh, and how to deal with that. So we've got several points. I've got about 8 points in that, major points. Then we're going to zoom in a bit more to speak about all of the issues related to reciting. So mistakes and complications and other questions that relate to qira'ah, the actual recitation aspect of it, because we are reading the Qur'an, and reciting of it, that's very important for us to focus on that. Then the next section is about giving corrections and taking corrections, because that's an inevitable part of Taraweeh. You could make a mistake, get confused, you forget what next. How do you take a correction? When you're waiting for a correction, should you take correction? Should you wait for corrections? What should you do? And how should people correct? What's the practical aspects related to that? I've got about nine points on that. And then confusions and mistakes related to mistakes in raka'ah. Like if you do 3 instead of 2, or you end up in 1. And other aspects related to that, I've got about 14 points on that. And then the Witr is a major part of the Taraweeh. So there's about 4 or 5 points on Witr. And then essentially the last segment is about completing the Taraweeh and ending Ramadan essentially with Taraweeh, and some of the masail related to that. Then if we've got time, then there's an appendix, but that's not necessary. That's only if you've got time, and then question and answers inshallah. So listen carefully. You should have brought paper so that you can take notes of the things that are relevant to you. Of course, we'll put this up and then you can do it again, but it's always best to take notes the first time round, because it's just easier. So if you have something you can take notes on, that would be great, especially those that you don't know about and you might forget. So that's very, very important. So when it comes to the online, I'll again take your questions with everybody else's at the end, inshallah. So having said that, let us begin with the practical advices. So these are just general practical advices. There may be some overlap here and there. With that said, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for assistance. We ask Allah for acceptance. And we begin. So the practical advices, this includes some masail as well. Because we're responsible, one of the main things which we don't really need to be speaking about, but it's a good reminder, is that purity is very, very important. Because it's a salat, it's a prayer, and our salat can't be accepted without purity, without proper wudhu. But wudhu is the basic aspect of it. We can't have impurity on our body or our clothing as well. So that means that we do have to learn some of the masail and rulings of purity. That means istibra and istinja. I know the wording sounds a bit complicated, but essentially, when a person goes to relieve themselves, they need to make sure that they don't just go in and run out again, because there's a procedure. And I don't want to have to start teaching this whole, collection of masail here on that, but simply put, you can't really leave until you're 100% sure that you're dominantly sure that there's no more drops left. There's nothing else going to come out afterwards. Because if it does, it's going to soil your clothing. And that could have a problem on your prayer. So, number one, you need to relieve yourself and then stay there. And there's multiple ways to make sure that you can relieve yourself. For some people, they put a tissue there and then for urine, for example, to make sure all the last drops have come out. To stand up, sit down a few times, to just move around a bit. And there's multiple ways that you could do that until you're sure that it's all. Don't become OCD about this and sit there for an hour, because it doesn't take an hour, right? But 1 or 2 minutes is usually the case. So you can't really literally go in and do your thing and walk out straight away. There is a procedure, and that's what you call istibra, which means to seek to make sure that no more will come out. Once you're sure, then you do istinja, which means you clean up. That's usually done with water, though if it hasn't spread much at all, then you can use a tissue, but otherwise it's always best to use water as well. So that's in brief. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but that's in brief. If you have any doubts about that, you should consult your ulama or read Ta'lim al-Haq. I'm going to give you a suggestion of 2 books if you want to read about this. Ta'lim al-Haq is one of them. Many of you should have that. The other book otherwise is Ascent to Felicity, right? This has all of the masail of prayer and of purity. So you need to make sure that you're quite clean, because you could be doing a wonderful Taraweeh prayer, but you could be essentially impure. Now, if you do have any impurity on your clothing, right? Usually what the understanding is that if you've got more impurity than the concave of your palm, so if I was to put my palm out like this under a tap and then move it away, how much water would remain in my palm? It'd probably be about 4 centimeters diameter. So that's a lot, to be honest, but where you could have removed it and you didn't, your salat will become undesirable, which means you're messing up everybody's prayer, though the prayer would be valid. But if it goes over this amount, then your prayer would be invalid. So you could do 20 rakats beautifully, but your prayer would be invalid if you got more than that impurity. Less than that, it'd still be makruh. It'd still be undesirable. You want to be as clean as possible, right? You want to be clean. That's it. Because cleanliness is half of faith. And then purity of intention. Why am I doing this? I've already discussed a bit of that. For the sake of Allah. And I'm so thankful that Allah has chosen me. If you remember that, then it's easier not to show off. Allah is the one who gave me this. He allowed me to complete. Allah reward my parents for pushing me, if that's the case. Allah be thanked for and be praised for the fact that I can do this and I can do this well enough, and I was chosen, right, out of thousands of people, children like me or young people like me, to lead the prayer. And when you keep Allah in mind, it just makes life so much easier. That's purity of intention. And then focus on Allah rather than on the people. So then the other thing is removing unwanted hair that needs to be removed, right, from the regions of the body that need to be cleansed. Likewise, keeping the nails clipped and being well groomed in general, because you're leading the prayer. You don't want people to criticize for no reason and feel bad because they say the Imam must be such. that he shouldn't make people feel like, who am I praying behind? Doing some crazy things or weird things that people, because at the end of the day, you must represent the best of people. Right? Okay, number 2 was essentially the purity of clothing and how to use the toilet and how to cleanse oneself. That's all done. Number 3 is you have to learn the relevant rulings of purity, of namaz and prayer, and of imamat. And that would be multiple things you'd have to learn, but that's why you're being here and we're being here together. That's exactly what we're doing. So we've tried to compile together all of the relevant rulings. So inshallah, in these next hours, we should get that all done, right? However, try to get these books and read through them for yourself, because when you hear it twice or thrice, you'll pick up on what's more relevant to you. Number 4, we're going to discuss a number of things. The next points are essentially about how to overcome nervousness, how to get over the fear of mistakes. These are very relevant. They can mess up your whole day. Because the whole day you're worried about what's going to happen in the night. And then it happens and then you're worried about what happened. The confident people don't do that. So how do you get over nervousness? Now, I can't tell you about everything, right? I'm sure you have your own experiences or of how you overcame your nervousness. Or it might be your first year. So I'm willing to hear from you if you've got a technique on that. So if you've got some special pills or special herbs that can get rid of nervousness, I'm sure there is a number of things like L-theanine and ashwagandha and these different herbs that you could take to just calm you down and just focus. They could help. Red Bull is probably a bad idea, okay? And anything like that, Lucozade Sports. This is all artificial sugar, right? So you don't want to do that, because I see somebody's got a Lucozade Sport already, mashallah, with him. You can drink it now, it's okay. Right? But I'm saying there's better stuff out there, right? And Prime is, I don't know about Prime, right, that everybody's talking about nowadays. One of the first things is that you either know your stuff or you don't. If you know your stuff, you could still be nervous because you're an introverted individual and you're shy of being in front, everybody's eyes, and your dad is behind you, your brother, your uncle, your grandfather, and all of these other uncles who are there just to jump on you and if you do wrong. And they've already told you, subhanallah. Allah make it easy, right? So there could be nervousness even if you know your stuff. Right? And if you don't know your stuff, then that's even worse, because the whole day you're trying to know. So the main thing is try to know. And I would say, I know it's a bit late now, but try to start at least 1 or 2 months in advance. It just makes life so much easier that you don't have to then be worried about it on that day only, but try to learn it in advance so that you're prepared. And in that regard, don't just learn your 4 rakats worth of reading, quarter juz or whatever it is. That's just not the right approach, because then you'll only know patches of the Qur'an. For a lot of people, they only focus heavily on the Qur'an in Ramadan. And if you're just learning a quarter, you'll know a quarter from each juz better than everything else, and the other side you might not even know. You can't even take a mistake out. Now if your Qur'an is really not there, then that's better than nothing. That's one way of starting. So this year take quarter, the next year take the next quarter, the third year take the next one. Like that could be one way of refreshing your Qur'an if it's really been allowed to deteriorate, your memorizing being allowed to deteriorate. But otherwise, if you know your Qur'an generally well, don't just learn your portion. It's so easy to do that, but don't ever succumb to that. For a decade, we've been doing usually 2 juz a day, and we finish in 15 days. And it's so easy to think, I'm only going to learn 1 juz. But no, I insist on reading both juz equally. I'm going to read 1 juz, my son is going to read the other juz. And sometimes we spring it on him that he's going to, which one of the two. So he needs to know both juz. He doesn't always know which juz that he's going to read. I just tell him literally before Tarawih, you're going to read this one, and I have to read the other one. We have to know both juz together. If you're doing only 1 juz a day, you need to know everybody's juz. Meaning you need to know the whole juz. Otherwise, it's just going to be selective, all right? So read that whole juz to somebody in the daytime. So have a fixed time, and preferably it should be somebody who's already hafiz,
or somebody who knows their stuff. Because if you read to a non-hafiz, they won't pick up the subtle mistakes you may have. After if you've memorized very well with a very particular teacher, you shouldn't have small mistakes. But not everybody does, and sometimes for some people it'll take 2, 3, 4 years to get rid of very, very small, fine mistakes. It just takes that time because you're just used to reading something wrong and it's not being caught. So rather than being caught in Taraweeh, always read to somebody. After all of these years, I insist somebody listen to mine before I do Taraweeh. It just feels so much better that you've read it to someone. It's number one. Number two, in the night time, in Tahajjud, right, preferably, or if not, then in Awwabin, after Maghrib on that same day, read it in 2 or 4 rakats, either to yourself. If you can find a partner to do tahajjud together with, and it's allowed for just 2 people to do tahajjud, there's no problem in that. It's just when you do it in a congregation, the Hanafis say that's makruh. But for 2 people to do tahajjud, so if you've got your brother or somebody else, and you do tahajjud of your Taraweeh section, then you'll be already confident for Taraweeh the next day. That really works very well. The nights were very short, but then when they started becoming longer, that's what we used to do. I used to read my portion, and my son used to read his portion, the opposite portion. Then in Taraweeh we would switch and do the other portion. That way we read both. Right? So try to do that if you can, but read to somebody. If you can't do it then at least find somebody to read it to. So preferably find somebody to read it to and read it to yourself standing in prayer. Because when you read it to somebody sitting down, that's very different from standing up and reading it. It's a whole different format. So what happens is that if you're not used to the format of standing up and repeating it, and you've read it to somebody sitting down, which is a whole different format, you get confused when you stand up in front of everybody and read it. If you can't find somebody to read it to, just read it to yourself, but loudly. When you're reading it in your own salat, in tahajjud, read it loudly, because that's how you're going to do it in Taraweeh. You could do it silently, but there's a different format in reading silently and loudly. So in tahajjud, in your own private bedroom, you just do it loudly, right? In whatever style you want. Pour your heart out. That way you've already heard yourself, so you're not embarrassed of your own voice. The next day in Taraweeh, just think nobody's there, I'm doing it in my bedroom, and just do it. Right? So read it to someone and read it in your own prayer, preferably loudly. If somebody can listen to it, praying with you, great. If you can't find anybody and your mum's willing to listen to you, she can sit and just listen like that, and then mark the mistakes and tell you about them afterwards. Right? But do read to somebody else as well. Once you've done that, you won't feel nervous as much, inshallah. That was the next few points, okay? Then, how much should you read? One of my teachers used to say, and I follow the advice until today, told me like 30 years ago, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, that make sure that in Ramadan, you read every one of your juz at least 15 times. So the juz that's going to be read on that night, somehow you read it 15 times. Benefit of that is if you can read every juz at least 15 times over your 30 days, you probably will not forget it for the rest of the year. Right? How do you do it 15 times? Well, it's quite simple. After you come back from Taraweeh, read it twice. That's 2, right? Then at Sehri time, read it twice. After Sehri, don't go to sleep until you can. Right? Now, if you're going to school and all of that kind of stuff, okay, you're not going to be able to do it 15 times maybe. That might be a bit more struggle. Then after that, you wake up in the morning and you do it at least, I think, 4 times. How many is that?
8.
That's 8 times. When you're going and coming from Dhuhr, you do it 2 times. That includes on your way to Dhuhr, in your Sunnah prayers and your Nafil prayers after Dhuhr, you just do your Qur'an. Right? Don't read anything else. Just do that day's juz. And you already know it so many times, you're just going to be repeating it. It's 2 more times. How many times? That's 10. You got 10 done, right? Then Asr time, again. Now you can adjust this however you want. I'm just telling you how easy it is. That's 2 more times. And then after Maghrib, you can do it 2 more times, and then Taraweeh is 1 more time. That's 15. Now if you can't do 15, at least do 10 times. You can't do less than 10. Your goal should be at least 10, but preferably 15. Now if you are doing 2 juz a day, then of course you'll have to do half of each. And you'll do 10 to 15 of both juz altogether, and then you'll have to then carry on afterwards.
But minimum, read your juz at least 10 times. Minimum. Throughout the day, you mark your own times that you want to do it, okay? And then stick to that. So what happens sometimes, if I've missed one, or I've woken up late, or I've gone to sleep, or whatever, I'll have to just carry on and catch up. Sometimes it does happen that you've missed it, and you've only done it 2 times less. Then you fill that up at the end. So that what that will count as is that many Qur'ans at the end as well. So if you've done every juz 10 times each day, you've done 10 Qur'an khatams in the whole month. But you've just done them 10 by 10. Do you see what I'm saying? So that's another thing that you can keep in mind. The other thing that you can do is if you're commuting, then you can easily be reading, right? If you have to commute to school or work or whatever, you can be reading. And where you can't read, then listen. But I think if you're a hafiz, you should just be reading, to be honest. The other thing is that spend some time where you can go over at least a summary of what that juz means, the contents of that juz in terms of its tafseer. It might be difficult to read a full juz tafseer, right? Because that could take a few hours, but try to get a summary. And there are many summaries out there. If you do search for summary of Taraweeh, you'll see it. If you want, a few years ago we did a coverage of the tafseer, 1 hour for each juz. So that'll be an hour of your time. The benefit of that is that you have some idea of what you're reading. You'll make some connections, like the story of Adam alayhi salam, when you read وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا, you'll have some understanding. It'll just be totally different to just reading without understanding anything. Because most of our huffaz don't understand what they read because they don't know Arabic yet. Right? So that is one way of getting a better connection with the Qur'an. So you're getting a general idea of what you're reading, what each surah stands for. It'll make a big difference in your life, inshallah. Now, you have to remember, when you then stand for the prayer, you make some istighfar and you ask Allah for assistance and you ask Allah for focus and for help. If you make a mistake, get over the fact that it's a big deal. Of course, if you're making tons of mistakes, then you're going to take longer and it just doesn't, but making a mistake is okay. I know it's a good thing to have an ambition to have no mistakes. I understand that. But if you do end up making mistakes, then don't be bothered about it. Once you can free yourself of the bother that I made a mistake, what are people going to say, then it won't affect the next part of your reading. Otherwise, you're like, I made a mistake, oh no, it's all messed up now, forget it. So you're going to make multiple more mistakes. I remember with me, that's what I used to always like, I don't need to, I want to make sure I don't make any mistakes. And then I realized that, I wish my Qur'an was better, but it's not. So why am I overly stressing about it? I make mistakes. I'm a human being, I make mistakes. Okay, I don't want to make 10 mistakes, but I might make 3 mistakes. And that's okay. Let me carry on. I don't want to spoil the next part because I made a mistake in the first part. That's what I'm trying to say. Don't let your mistakes be debilitating for you. Right? If you can see a pattern of the mistakes you make, try to correct that in the future. Like try to recognize what mistakes you make. Why do you make mistakes? Is it concentration? Is it just because you're trying to remember what's next rather than memorize what's next? A lot of people make mistakes because what they do is in their juz, they don't know the whole thing like Surah Al-Fatiha streamed, where it's automatically they know what's next, especially mutashabihat. What they've tried to do is try to remember the mutashabihat. They try to remember it like, oh, it's going to be this one here. Problem with remembering is sometimes when you get stressed, you forget what's next. So stop remembering it, memorize it. What do you mean by memorizing it? You literally take the previous verse and that one, you read them together 50 times. So it's automatically what's next. You do the same thing for the next mutashabihat when it comes as well. So for that day, you just know that anyway. You'll know that when you come here, you have to turn right and not left. Otherwise, you'll forget. Because when you're in stress, you forget what's next. And I used to have this issue that I used to try to just remember. How many times in your life are you going to remember what's next? Each time you want to read it, you're going to have to remember it. And go and refresh it. No, just memorize it. Then it becomes automatic. And mashallah, there's some huffaz, mashallah, they've done it so well that it's all memorized, like Fatiha for them. Right, it's just Fatiha for them. They just read, mashallah. If Allah's given you that, that's very good. Don't worry about what people are going to say.
just expect people are going to say something. So then you're not worried when they say it. Unless they're genuinely telling you something, then take it on board. Yeah. So if you do make a mistake, stay calm and collected. Focus on what's next. Focus on getting it right and what's next and moving on. Don't become agitated. Don't lose your momentum. Don't use your rhythm, your speed or style. Because once you change your style, if you're used to reading in a certain rhythm and style and you change that, you make mistakes. Unless you're very versatile and you can read in 10 different styles, and you can choose whichever one you want. But a lot of people, they know it in one style only, right? And some people are so fixed that they know exactly where to stop, and if they stop any other place, they'll get confused. Right? You don't want to be like that, obviously, but you take care of it however you want to. You'll have some good days and you may have some bad days. That's just part of life, right? Until you get so experienced that it all goes without a problem, inshallah. The Qur'an should move the hearts of the believer. That's why it's beneficial for you to read the Tafseer. So you'll put more heart into it. And it's supposed to increase us in Iman. So in Surah Al-Anfal, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, the believers are those that when Allah is mentioned, their hearts become fearful. And when His verses are recited to them, it increases them in faith. We've got that responsibility of moving people. We need to move ourselves first. May Allah make it easy. If you get totally blank and people behind you are confusing you more, just go into ruku. Just go into ruku. As long as you've read at least 3 short verses or 1 long verse, just go into ruku. Your rakaat is done. Then you can, if it's not the next rakaat, you can, or I'm sure you'll recollect your understanding. But don't go into your ruku and then start reading what's next, right? Because you're not supposed to be reading in ruku. Yes, while you're doing ruku, etc., if it's just in your mind, that's different as a secondary thought. But you can't in ruku or sujood be going over your door, right? Over what you're supposed to read. So, like, you can't be in there and let me read the first 5 verses just so I know. That becomes a habit. You don't have to do that. Some Tarawih, sometimes you get the habit that after every 2 rakats you have to pick up the Qur'an, open the page and check what's next. But even you don't have to do that. It's not that bad, is it? It just becomes a habit. So if you don't look at it, then you feel that you don't know. And make it a habit that you don't have to look. You only have to look if you genuinely read something and it was nobody got it right and you're still confused and you check for what you're in about. Don't have to look for what's next. Otherwise it'll become a habit. When it becomes a habit and you're not able to do it, you'll be confused. Alright, so don't do that. Try that. You don't have to open the Qur'an during Taraweeh. It's all done before. If you need some water or something, don't hesitate to drink water. Don't drink a drink. I did remember once I was there and there was somebody drinking honey water. Now I know honey water is supposed to be good for you, but the problem is if you drink it between the 4 rakats, you're going to have taste of honey in your mouth. And then with the saliva and everything, that's going to go down your throat and that will break your prayer. Because you're taking a foreign substance in prayer. If you want to drink honey water, then drink some clear water afterwards so that the honey's all gone. Because honey is quite sticky, isn't it? So none of that stuff during the prayer. Water is fine. Just clear water is fine. That's neutral, that's fine. If the room gets too hot, you see, all of this matters. So, learn what to wear so that you're not going to be unnecessarily bothered by your too much clothing, too less clothing, or the room being too hot, or a smell. Like put some nice perfume on, or something like that. All of these side things, don't let them bother you. So then sort them out in advance. Right, now just going back to how to carry yourself and that, there's just certain things people don't like in our masajid. Like if you do those things, they're going to complain, like short beards. Like in our community, mashallah, they want everybody to be representing themselves in the best manner possible. So that's why people cutting their beards and all that, they consider that to be, a major problem. They don't want to pray behind somebody. They say they're fasiq, or and so on and so forth. There's lots of discussion about it, so I'm not going to get into. But you want to what happens is so much fitna then occurs. If that's the case, some people will start complaining. The father of this individual is just very biased of you. He's going to start arguing, no, my son is right for Taraweeh. But man, he doesn't have a beard. It just gets into such a confusion. So if you are going to do Taraweeh, make sure you have all of those things in terms of the clothing that you're wearing. Just avoid having people point fingers at you. Short sleeves is another issue. To be honest, short sleeves, there's nothing wrong with praying with short sleeves. There's a problem with praying with rolled up sleeves. That's the real mas'ala, is that you can't roll up your sleeves and pray. That's makruh. Short sleeves are not a problem according to that. However, traditionally, even among some ulama, they think it's makruh. So what you're going to have is you're going to have all of these guys at the back who don't know that and who are not willing to even accept it in some cases. They're just going to stop. And it just causes fitna in Ramadan. So there's no point. We don't live in a very, very hot country anyway. Right? So just wear long sleeves. For example, I know this is just very simple stuff I'm talking about, but I just want us to avoid any kind of skirmish in Ramadan for no reason. If your masjid has women praying as well, then you have to intend them. Well, that means that you need to know you're leading women, so that's in your intention. So, when you start, like, I'm leading the prayer, right? 2 rakats of this sunnah prayer of Taraweeh, and there are women behind. You need to know that there's women behind. You don't have to necessarily say anything with your tongue, but if you're totally oblivious there's women there, then that might be an issue. That could be an issue, actually. So if your masjid does cater for women, and there's women praying behind you, or you're praying at home and your mother, sister, etc., you need to intend them. Intention just means that you know when you're leading that there are women praying behind you. That's sufficient, right? To know that. All right. So those were the practical things. Now let's get into some more specific fiqh related, mas'ala related stuff. So we've already discussed the 8 and 20 rakats. And I'm not going to discuss that more, but 20 rakats has been pretty much the ijma', which means the consensus of the 4 madhabs, majority of scholars, of ulama, imams, etc., throughout the centuries. In the last so many decades, we've had a push towards 8, and in different places, right? So, as I said, this is not our purpose here of what we're talking about. If somebody is praying in a place where there's only 8 rakats and they can't change that, then you can go and do your 12 rakats afterwards in short form if you need to, if you don't have much of the night, and you can do that afterwards. Okay, now, especially since 2 or 3 years COVID times, lots of questions about how young or how old you have to be to lead Taraweeh prayer. So, mashallah, we've got many families who have hafiz who are 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, and they're not baligh, they're not mature yet, they're not adolescent, right? They're not adolescent yet. So can they lead prayers? So according to our sound, strong view in our madhab, children can't lead Taraweeh prayers. Right? They can't lead anybody in prayer because they're not qualified yet in terms of their age to lead the prayers. You have to be baligh, you have to be mature. Right? I don't think I need to, unless somebody wants me to, at the end to describe how to become mature. Right? But yes, so you need to be at least, so that means 14, 15 at least, right? And then you can lead the prayer. If there is a kid, 11, 12, at home anyway, he can do his own Taraweeh. So there's nothing stopping him from doing his own Taraweeh, or her for that matter. A young girl, or an older girl, she can do her own Taraweeh at home, read the whole Qur'an. She just can't lead anybody. And a young kid can't lead anybody. But you can do your own Taraweeh loudly, and if you've got a mother or somebody who's sitting there, they can even listen to you with the Qur'an open outside, they're not praying, and then they can just mark and tell you later. So that would be one way if they wanted to do so. Number 3. This is very important. Let's just say you got late for Taraweeh one day. Right, getting out of the house or something, you had to clean up, or I don't know, you had a stomach issue, whatever, and you made it, and you do the first Taraweeh, for example. You've not done Esha. Are you allowed to lead the Taraweeh prayer if you've not done your Esha yet? You're not allowed to. Taraweeh can only start after you've done your Esha. Now the masjid's done Esha, Imam's done Esha, everybody else, but you haven't, you're not allowed to lead Taraweeh because it's not your Taraweeh. Taraweeh has to be started after Esha. Just remember that. which means that you'd have to quickly go and do your 4 rakats. Then you could miss your sunnah prayer. You shouldn't be, but if you're in a hurry, you do your 4 rakats, then you can lead the prayer. So you can maybe tell somebody, you do 2 rakats only because you can't make the whole masjid wait sometimes. Let me just do my 4 and then I'll join in afterwards. But remember that Taraweeh only starts after you've done your Isha prayer. Not after it's done in the masjid, after you've done yours, whether that was with the Imam or without the Imam. Okay? So Taraweeh has to be prayed after Isha. However, what about now, let's just say that you caught 14 rak'ats or 16 rak'ats and you'd miss 4. Can you do the Witr? Can you lead or follow the Witr even though you've not done all of your Taraweeh? So in that case you can. Because you can finish Taraweeh after Witr. Right? So you could have Witr in between, preferable not to. But if you had Witr and then you had 4 rak'ats left, you could do those afterwards. So there's no harm in doing it that way if you were forced to do it that way. So hopefully that's clear. You have to do your Taraweeh after Isha, 4 rakats at least, but Witr doesn't affect it that much. Does Taraweeh have to be in a masjid? I guess COVID has told us it doesn't have to be. You can do it anywhere, right? Literally, you can do it anywhere. However, the greatest reward will be in the masjid. Because the masjid is where the congregation is, the more people and the place being the masjid, 25 to 27 times reward. Anywhere else is about 10 to 15 times, I think, the reward. Now, sometimes though, let's just say you're only getting 4 rakats in the masjid. And you would like to do 20 or 10 each. Then you could do that at home or somewhere else. Make your own little congregation. You might lose some reward of the masjid, but you get more reward of the fact that, and it might be better for you in some cases, that you can lead the whole Taraweeh. Because it'll be good for you to do the whole thing, because it's more preserving of the Qur'an for you. Do you see what I'm saying? Right? Then can there be 2 Taraweeh prayers in a masjid? Simultaneously or one after the other? So let's just say that your father's a committee member and he's like, my son has to do Taraweeh. But they've already confirmed 5 people and there's no space. So then he insists that you do Taraweeh in another room with 10 people. That's not really that's not really advisable to do that, because you don't want multiple Jamaats in one place taking place at the same time. Because that becomes like a bit of a competition and stuff like that. That's not right. Yeah, maybe in a madrasa for training, they've got people in different rooms all training for that, and the teacher goes around and checks them out. There could be some, but in a normal masjid you want 1 Taraweeh. However, there are cases where we have, in some communities where we have restaurant workers who finish at odd hours in the, like 11 o'clock or 10:30, 11 o'clock, and they miss the Taraweeh. So something like that, where we've allowed 2 Jumu'ah prayers because the masjid can't, or there's just too many people, there's only 1 masjid and there's not other places where they pray. In that case, they're allowed to have 1 Taraweeh after the other. So you could have 1 Jama'ah finish, the main one, and then they could do another one afterwards. Can you lead both Taraweehs? Can anybody lead 2 Taraweehs? You've done 20 in, and then you want to do another 20. Quite ambitious, mashallah. That would be quite adventurous. Can you do that? So no, you can't lead 2 Taraweehs, because once you've done your 20, that your sunnah is done. You can't repeat that. However, you could join in another Taraweeh as a muqtadi, as a listener if you want to. Nothing wrong with that. Anybody can do 40 rakats of Taraweeh, 2 Taraweehs, 3 Taraweehs, no problem, all night. But as leading, you should only do 20. And then after that, somebody else should lead the prayer. The reason why you can't lead a second Taraweeh is because once you've done your 20, your Taraweeh is done. So now when you're leading nafil prayer, optional prayer. People behind you, they're doing Taraweeh. Taraweeh is stronger and higher than a regular nafil prayer. Imam has to always be equal or higher. Here you're actually lower because you're doing nafil. People behind you are doing sunnah, higher level of prayer. That's why you can't do it, if you've done it already. Okay, next question. Have you ever seen anybody breaking their wudhu in Taraweeh or in any prayer? The Imam. Have you ever seen an Imam breaking? You've seen it? Anybody else? You've hardly ever seen it. Imams never break their prayer. Imams never break their wudhu in prayer. They do actually. Right? I've been an Imam. I've broken it at least twice or thrice. Or actually, it wasn't breaking. It was more that I forgot that I didn't have wudhu somehow. So what do you do in that case? They're both different situations. If you didn't have wudu, you thought you did because you usually have it, and then this time somehow you got there, or you found that there was something sticky on your hand and the wudu did not, the water did not get there, something like that, or whatever it is, you have to be careful about that. Now don't feel embarrassed. Okay? And our communities need to stop bothering people about this, that they remember that for the rest of their life that this guy made such a mistake. This is really, really bad. People make mistakes. You shouldn't be scared and then just carry on the prayer. So let's just say that you didn't have wudu and you got to Taraweeh and you led the Taraweeh, in the middle of Taraweeh, remember. Just tell somebody, apologize, go and do wudu and come back. So if you didn't have wudu to start with, that salat has not even begun. So you were literally just making the motions while you were not really in prayer. Everybody thought they were in prayer. So that prayer is not accepted anyway. So you'd have to go and do it again. That's one thing. If you broke your wudu, now there's a special scenario and you should all learn about that, because usually you have the other Taraweeh leaders behind, right? So if you break your wudu, what you do is you literally turn around and grab one of your friends or the Imam or whoever it is, and you drag them forward. They usually should take no more than 2 big steps. You don't want to take 3 steps, 2 big steps, and then they carry on the prayer. Substitute. It's just a substitute. It's like you stop the car, put them in the driver's seat, and you went to do wudu. Do you understand? That's what you do. If you break your wudu, don't like freak out and say, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. They'll wonder like, why are you saying salam in the middle of salat for? Right? So don't say salam because you've broken your wudu anyway. You just turn around, grab the guy and put him forward. And you should know this, that if you're in prayer and the Imam suddenly stops, turns around and grabs you, you're going to be wondering, if you don't know this muscle, you're going to be wondering, what is he doing? I've never seen this before, because it hardly happens. I said, I've pulled people. Like I've done it once or twice at least, but the guy knew what he was doing. That's why they should, Prophet ﷺ said, the people behind me, closest to me, should be the people of intelligence who know this stuff, so that if there's something that happens wrong. When Umar radiallahu anh got stabbed in that Fajr prayer, that was going to be fatal, he stopped leading, and somebody, Abdur-Rahman ibn Auf radiallahu anh, somebody else, they came and carried on the prayer. It's the same prayer. The people behind didn't even know, like further back, they didn't know. No microphone in those days. So remember that. But if you don't have wudu, the prayer has not begun, so you can't even start. You didn't even start. So you'll have to then let people know. And there you could probably just say salam. Because when you say salam, people think you've ended your prayer. They're going to be wondering. Just make a very clear announcement. Or tell the Imam Sahib to make the announcement. Just go and explain to the Imam. The Imam will make an announcement and you'll carry on. Now, we will leave it for the other section to discuss that if you did mess up 2 rakats, but you've read already like 4 sides, 1 surah or whatever in there, do you have to repeat it again? So we'll discuss that in the next section, inshallah. We move on to the next set of issues. This is related to reciting specific issues and challenges and complications and confusions regarding recitation. So some things I tell you is what we have to do, and other things are what you do if you make a mistake. Firstly, try to read Bismillah before every Surah Al-Fatiha. You know, when in each rakat you read Surah Al-Fatiha first, try to read Bismillah. We do it silently as Hanafis, we do it silently, Shafis do it loudly. But even though you're Hanafi and you do it silently, make sure you do it. Our salat would be valid if you didn't do it, but mashallah, we live in multicultural societies, and if there's Shafi'is behind us, it means that we're missing a verse. Surah Al-Fatiha, according to Shafi'i school, starts from Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim is the first verse. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen is the second verse. That's why we don't want their salat to become incomplete, because as representative Imam, we want to be inclusive of everyone. So there's no harm in us doing that, is there? So at least before the Fatiha, make sure you read Bismillah. You don't necessarily have to read Bismillah before you read the next part of the surah, right? You can there as well, but it's not necessary. But you can. I'm not going to tell you how to do the prayer, because that is a separate topic. I'm just going to tell you the common issues related to Taraweeh that could go wrong. So that's the first thing. Number two, according to the Hanafi school, and I see the majority here are Hanafis, so according to the Hanafi school, while Bismillah is not part of Surah Al-Fatiha, and we have one Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim mentioned in the Qur'an within the verses as a proper verse, which is in which juz? 19th juz. Innahu min Sulaiman wa innahu Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim Allah ta'lu alayya wa'tuni muslimin. One of the shortest letters written in history. Sulaiman alayhi salam's letter to Bilqis. That's part of the Qur'an. That we're not talking about that one. Like if you missed that, you wouldn't have done the whole Qur'an. However, there's another Bismillah. The Hanafis say that the Bismillah has been also revealed as a separator between surahs. So that's why at least once in the whole Taraweeh Qur'an Khatam, you have to read one Bismillah aloud somewhere and pretend you're a Shafi'i maybe. Right? See how it feels to be a Shafi'i. So it could be before Baqarah. So as soon as you start, you say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim Alif Lam Mim. You could do Bismillah there. So usually what the Hafizes do is they get together beforehand and they decide on a format of you're going to do up to here, you're going to do up to here, we're going to do up to here. You can also decide who's going to do the Bismillah when. It's easy just to start it off from Surah Al-Baqarah. Just do it once, it's done and dusted. Some people have exotic places. I want to do it before Qul Huwallahu Ahad. I want to do it before Yasin or whatever. Makes no difference. It just has to be done one place. Best to just start it off and just do it and you've done it. So at least then that means that by the time you do one Nas, you would have done the whole Qur'an, including the additional one Bismillah, right? Between any two surahs. You got that? It has to be done at least once between any two surahs. So some people just do it before Baqarah. How much should you recite in every raka'at? Now that depends on when you're going to finish the Qur'an. If you're going to finish it on the 29th, why can't I finish on the 30th? Because it might not be 30 days, then you'll be left with one juz. That's why nobody finishes on 30th, usually. There was one shaykh in the past, and he used to actually tell the Imam for Taraweeh, on the first day of Taraweeh, do 2 juz or 1 juz. If he said do 2 juz, it means that Ramadan is probably going to be 29 days. And it used to turn out that it was 29 days. Shaykh Abdul Qadir Raipuri. And if he said just do 1 juz, it probably was going to be 30 days because then they have 30 days to do it. Right? I'm not saying that's magic or anything, right? But that was just, he had this ability to figure that out. We don't have that ability. So usually every place, they try to finish on 29th. But you could finish on 27th, you could finish on 25, you could finish on the 28th, to be honest. But they prefer to finish on an odd night because that's usually Laylatul Qadr possibility. So one is you get the benefit of Laylatul Qadr, you also get the benefit of finishing the Qur'an, because when you finish the Qur'an, inshallah, that's a great achievement. Du'as are accepted, so you should maximize. Do you understand the theory behind that? Now, in some places what they do is they finish the Qur'an and then they are really relaxed in the next days. Right? In fact, some people think that when you finish the Qur'an, Tarawih is done. So that's why a lot of masjid changed from 27 to 29th. Because when they used to finish on 27, the congregation used to become like half or something. Because I've done my Qur'an. You know, it's like maktab. Once you've done your Qur'an, you think you've done Bukhari. And you think you're finished now. And it's just, you've done the sunnah of the Qur'an, but Tarawih is still there. Right? And so you can finish it on any day, but usually in masjids they do 27 or 29. 29 is probably better because you get to be more relaxed. If you do 27, then you have to do 1 1/4 for more days. Then you end up after the 20th, usually you do 1 1 1. It's whatever equation works for you, to be honest. Now there is this idea. I remember once I was doing Taraweeh and I read, you know, when you finish the 4th juz, حرمت عليكم أمهاتكم وبناتكم, that verse. وَالْمُحْصَنَاتُ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ is the beginning of the 5th juz, right? They're actually connected. It's strange that there's a juz there, to be honest. The juz isn't from the time of the Prophet ﷺ. You know, the supara is not from the time of the Prophet ﷺ. The surahs are. The supara is the 30 division. That's a later development. It's fine, it's useful. However, in some places, it actually cuts between the theme. The story hasn't ended. the clause, the point hasn't been fully made. Wal muhsanat is actually part of that. So that's why I usually finish Hurrimat alaykum to the end of the juz, and then I read Wal muhsanat, that one big verse as well. That's when it kind of a decent place to stop. I remember one of the committee members, they came and they said, why did you do that for? I said, well, because it's actually related to that, so it's appropriate. So then I realized, he's saying, but there's people from other masjids who do the same format. They might have come here to read, and now they're going to miss that one part. Because in the other masjid, they actually stopped at the end of the 4th juz. So they're going to miss out al-muhsanat. To be honest, what I thought is that that's their problem. All right? However, I think we need to educate people about this. Now, if you're just young Hafiz, you're not going to know this, but tell the Imam, talk to the Imam. And if you do read Wal Muhsanat together, I guess the next day you could probably just read from Hurrimat again, so that if somebody had missed it, you could be doing it on both days, so that way you're not breaking in half, and you're just reading. There's no problem reading something double, right, as well. Do you see what I'm saying? There's no problem in reading something double. And so that's one of the. There's a few places like that. For example, in the beginning of, which juz is it that it literally stops at the end of the first verse of the next surah? Which juz is that? رُبَمَا يَوَدُّ Alif Lam. What is it? Alif Lam Ra tilka ayatul kitabi wa Qur'anin mubin رُبَمَا يَوَدُّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. So in some cases, if on the previous day you just stopped at the surah and didn't read that, that would be fine. If you did read it, it'd be fine as well. And then the next day, just start again from the surah. So you don't have to start from Rubama. You can actually start from the surah because there's one verse of the surah. There's nothing wrong with that, right? So whenever in doubt, do ask though, because you might get confused again. So do ask about that. Now, because many of you have just memorized the Qur'an, don't know Arabic yet, so you don't understand. What you do want to be careful of is where you stop, in between the verses and at the end of verses, because although there's a round end of verse sign, sometimes in some Qur'ans it'll have a la on it, or something which means don't stop here, because the theme hasn't finished, the sentence hasn't actually completed. So you don't want to stop in the middle of that. You go into ruku and you come back, and then you kind of like start from the middle of the story, like literally in the middle of a sentence. So that's why those of you who know the meaning, you'll figure that out, and those who don't know the meaning, then you should go by those stop and not stop signs more carefully, because otherwise for you it makes no difference, because you don't know what it means anyway, right? But people behind who know what it means, it's really, really agitating and awkward. And it's like, man, this guy doesn't know, like, just messed my whole story up. And it's wrong. Tajweed, the meaning of tajweed is to read correctly and stop correctly. So you might have wonderful tajweed because you've been taught that, but because you don't know the meaning and you're not even following the stoppings and the symbols, your stopping is messed up, and it's like I'm talking and then suddenly, and then after a few minutes I start from he was gone, or was gone. I was like, what is he talking about in the next rakaat? I didn't do that too well. Right? Do you understand? It's just really confusing. So just because you don't know doesn't mean that you don't do it properly. As I said, if you follow those symbols properly, so go and look at the back of the Qur'an for what those symbols means, and try to at least know where to stop and where not to stop. And where in doubt, ask somebody. You know that we have ruku'. Now, the reason the rukus were made, from what I understand, is that if you were to do one ruku for every raka'at, you would finish the Qur'an in 27 days. On the 27th night. That's what I've never checked it. That's what people have told me. I've never bothered checking that. But that's what it was done. Again, ruku was not there in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, but they're very useful. And you might be wondering, why aren't rukus equal in size? Why are some big, some small, some similar? Like some are like half a page. Like in the 14th juz, it was like half a page. I was like wondering why. Because they're thematic. That cluster of verses is one theme, then it moves to another theme, next cluster. And that theme could have been long. So that's why the ruku will end. So ruku usually goes by theme. If you do end at a ruku, most of the time that'll be correct. because they do represent where the theme ends. That part of the story finishes. Then there's another discussion after that. Do you see what I'm saying? So that would be useful to do that. And where you're not stopping at a ruku, then you better know where you're stopping, because that will be where you might mess up and confuse something. Now, the qira'ah that we read, unless you know the multiple qira'at and you are reading another qira'ah of Warsh or Duri or Susi or something, right? I don't want to confuse you with the names, but the qira'ah we read is Imam Hafs's qira'ah from Asim. Now there are 3 places in there which are different. They are like other qira'at, and they're non-standard in our qira'at. Okay? Only 3 places from what I recall. Some of you will know some of them, but there'll be some that are probably, people will be confused with. So the first one, does anybody know which ones I'm talking about? Go on. Okay, Bismillahi majreha is the easiest one. That's the only place in the Quran where you're allowed to read what they would call majhul. Right? A. Alif kasra E. Not the old style of A. But that's a place where you're actually supposed to do a majreha. That's actually Bismillahi majraha. That's the real, in our style, that should have been majraha. However, according to the imala sughra, the slight inclination, it should be majraha. And then according to the higher form of inclination is majreha, to push the fatha towards the kasra. You can't read majriha because that becomes kasra or a ya. But it's majreha, it's closer to the ya. It's the only place you do that. Other qira'at, other readers from other modes of qira'at, they do that in multiple places. When, for example, وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَيْهَا. We're not going to start doing all of that. Even if you have memorized it from a qari, unless you know the rules, you don't want to do that, right? The guys behind you probably jump on you like, "Ye kya kar rahe, what are you doing anyway?" But you don't want to do that. However, the one place we do that is in Bismillahi Majra. You all know that, I'm assuming, right? That's definitely taught. That one's the easy one. There's 2 others which are more complicated. Which ones are they? Who knows? Right, so in Surah Yusuf, there's La Ta'manna. What verse is that? In Surah Yusuf, it's verse 11. The way we read it is La Ta'manna ala Yusuf. La Ta'manna ala Yusuf. That's the standard, most people would read it. However, it's incorrect. The correct way of reading this is that this is originally La Ta'manuna. But they put it together. So now there's 2 ways to read this. How many of you know how many of you have been taught how to read this, the various ways? Put your hand up. Like up, proper up. Okay, there's only like 3 or 4, 5, like a minority of people know how to read that. There's 2 ways of reading it. One way is a bit strange. Look, you'll have to watch the mouth to do this because there's no way to hear it. La ta'manna, la ta'manna. So it sounds the same, but the reader needs to round the mouth, round the lips. La ta'manna, in between. It's like you're standing there, it's like La ta'manna. Sounds like you're stealing it. But why do you have to do that? Because as I said, originally it was La ta'manuna. So what we're doing is when you say La ta'manna, to make it easy to read, we have made it La ta'manna. But we make our mouth round to display or to indicate that it was a dhamma here. That it was La ta'manuna. That's one way to do it. It's very easy actually. You can try it out. It's very easy to do. Right? Go and try it out. For yourselves. La ta'manna, la ta'manna. Don't change your tone. That's the first way to do it. So make sure you do that in Taraweeh. Otherwise you would have done wrong. Right? You missed something out. The second way to do it is that we bring it back to what it originally is supposed to be, but we only do 1/3 of a dhamma. Have you ever practiced doing 1/3 of a dhamma, of a pesh? So it's something like this. La ta'manuna, la ta'manuna. Not, you don't want to do full la ta'manuna. That would be full. Ta'manu. That's full. Ta'manuna. So it's just, you just touch the dhamma, like 1/3 they say. They got fancy, posh names for this. I'm not going to bore you with that. But that, which one would be easier, the first one or the second style? The first one for most people would be easy, because getting that 1/3 right, you do need to do it through the shaykh to try to get it right. Okay? So the easiest way is لا تأمن على Yusuf. Right? لا تأمن على Yusuf. So that's the simple way. Make sure you get this practiced, right? And make sure you do that. If that's in your, well, you should be doing it all the time actually when you read Qur'an, not just in Taraweeh. That is part of your reading. That's how you should be teaching it as well. Okay, and the last one is in Surah Fussilat. Surah Fussilat, which is Surah number 41, verse 44. أعجمي وعربي. Right? It's أعجمي وعربي. Now there's a Hamza. It looks like an alif, but let me just inform you that anywhere in the Qur'an where it might look like an alif, those long lines, now listen to this carefully, if it has a fatha, dhamma, kasra or sukoon on the alif, that is actually a Hamza. We call it an alif, it looks like an alif, but it's actually a Hamza. And what is an alif then? Alif is something that doesn't have any haraka on it. Like qala, you know, when you stretch the fatha. Qaf, alif, fatha, qa, maliki. Right? Sakha, that alif. Dal, that's a alif. As soon as you got a or u or e, that's a Hamza. The secret of doing a Hamza is that you have to do the sudden sound, the In Urdu they call it the jatka sound. If you start your namaz and you're like, Allahu Akbar, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, you've missed your Hamzas. There was no Allah, Alhamdulillah. You don't have to do it that pronounced like you know, but you do have Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. You say Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. A lot of people make this mistake. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Was that correct? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Was that correct? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. That Hamza, without a Hamza, without this there is no Hamza. That's the secret of doing a Hamza. So, now in A'jami, you've got two Hamzas. For Arabs, that's complicated. Can't have two Hamzas. A'jamiyum. I mean, we practiced it, so it's okay. It's just because there's an ayn after this as well. A'jamiyum wa Arabi. So what they do here is tasheel. They simplify it. How do you simplify it? Now this might sound a bit confusing. The first one you do as a Hamza, proper Hamza, right? Second one you do between a Hamza and an alif. What does that even mean? Well, from my definition, you understand Hamza is that which has a sound. Alif doesn't have, it's just a stretch sound. It's like a smooth, just stretch sound. So if you're going to do somewhere between, it's called bain, half. So you do half a alif, half a Hamza. So it'd be like something like It's like this, look. Would be full Hamzas. That's not the way we're supposed to be doing this. Can you see that the second one is just being phased in? The first one proper. Can you see that? Again, you'll have to train under someone if you've not been taught this properly, because a lot of people don't unfortunately teach this properly. So get it sorted. Jamiyun, you have to get the ayn as well. Jamiyun wa Arabi, not jamiyun. You can't do that in the second one. You do it without that, but you do it with a fatha. Right? I'm not going to train everybody right now. Okay, but go on, try it once at least. The secret is do the first one strong, and the second one just kind of phase it in. Jamiyun instead of jamiyun. Jamiyun. Those are the three places. Bismillahi majreha. لا تأمننا, لا تأمننا, right? Number 2, Surah Yusuf. The first one is Surah Hud, right? Verse 41. And the last one is Jamiyun, which is in Surah Fussilat, verse 44. What is that? That's the last page of which is 24, not 26, right? 24. That took that took the most time, subhanallah. Now let's move on. Speed of qira'ah, what should it be? It needs to be exactly 27.3 miles a minute. I'm just joking, right? It's like, how do you measure the tone? That depends on you. If somebody, I would say that it really depends on how you read. However, moderate, al-qasd, tablughu, right? Keep it moderate, and you'll take everybody with you. Just depends on how you read and what people will be appreciating. You definitely don't want to go too fast that you can't get the tajweed right and you mess up on rules. That would be totally incorrect, wrong, and sinful. However, you can definitely go fast enough, depending on how the people are and length of the night and so on. We've had some tough years, because of very small nights, short nights. So it just depends. It just really depends. But you want to keep it medium, and you can go as fast as your tajweed will allow you to do proper ruling. And you should go a bit slower than that to keep it medium. You don't want to go too slow. There's some people, they really go too slow. If your Tarawih is taking 2 hours, and your usual Tarawih in your area, I think a good Tarawih, including Esha and Witr, should be 1 hour 45 minutes. That's a sound Tarawih. Any less than that is fast. 1.5, probably acceptable. What do you think? Probably 1.5, probably acceptable. Anything less than 1.5, there's probably some cutting corners, unless there's some really special reader who can read really fast and be very clear. Okay, that's kind of my assessment. I may be wrong, but I say 1 hour 45 minutes is a very decent Tarawih. Anything more than that is probably long. 2 hours is long, but some masjids, that's how they want it, and that's fine if that's what they want. But between 1.5 to 1 hour 45 minutes is decent, including Witr. Okay. Anything less than 1.5 hours, 1 hour 20 minutes is a bit on the fast side. There might be some issues there, and I don't want to make a judgment, because again, there are some readers who can read fast and well, but not everybody can do that. There's very few people who can read very fast, like sufficiently fast, but get it all right. Right? That's an art, right? So that's what you would probably look at. Don't get pressured by people, but if you are taking too long, then you do need to probably speed up, because if you're just very slow and people don't like it, you're just going to cause. Then find a masjid where it's slow. Don't insist on going to a masjid that's very slow, where you read very, very slowly. And I can't judge you, but I'm just saying, if you understand that if you're reading very slow and you're in a masjid where they're not going to enjoy it, you're just going to be stressed. And there's going to be people constantly talking about you. So what's the point of that? Find a masjid where they do slower. Right? So go according to that. But if they want you to do faster than normal, faster than average, faster than in a wrong way, then you probably don't want to do it there, or you want to do it to the best of your ability. So do try to work with people, because people do have to go to work, etc. Just keep that in mind. Now, there are some ways of reading slower, and then there are some discretions, like mad munfasil, right? That you can actually do qasr. So in some of the mads, if you've not been taught this, then you'll have to go and learn it, and I don't want to teach it to you right now, but some of the mad munfasils can be shortened. Not mad muttasil, but mad munfasils can be shortened to a qasr, 1 alif level. We don't have to stretch it to 3 or 4 or 5, right? So if you do want to learn about that because you've got a challenge in your place, then go and learn about that, right? And then maybe that might help you. It might save a few minutes. It's not going to save that much, to be honest, right? But yeah, that's pretty much what's qira'ah related. And again, if you have any other questions that I've not answered, then please ask the question later. Now, continuing on from qira'ah, but now to do with taking mistakes out. That's something that you really need to get right, because it really spoils the whole mood otherwise, right? Number one, please have an agreed procedure for sorting out mistakes, correcting them and so on, and who will correct them. If you have trigger happy 10 uncles at the back, matured, retired huffaz who are just waiting for you to make a mistake and then just jump in all at once and what you need to do is speak to the Imam and committee and say, this is just too stressful, we need a procedure. This is what we did when I was an Imam in one of the masjids. We said only, these people are going to take mistakes. Imam first, then him, and then him. And if they miss it, okay, you can take it. Otherwise, we don't want people shouting from all over the masjid. The most difficult, what is the most difficult surah to do? Yasin. Because mashallah, everybody speaks up. Right? So, when you preempt these things, when you have a format, when you organize, when you announce, it just makes life easier. And if there is still somebody who just insists, then somebody's going to have to take that person aside and say, look, you're not really helping the situation. You might not be able to do that because you're the lead, you're the Imam, you're a young guy maybe. Get the Imam or somebody else to do it nicely that, look, you're just causing them stress. You're just causing them a hassle. But if you don't organize it like that, you're going to be in trouble. Now, between the Huffaz, you can... La ilaha illallah. You could have your little system that he's going to take the mistake out first, then him. If they miss it, then the third person. And sometimes minor mistakes that don't change the meaning. This problem is that you don't know what the meaning is being changed or not, or because there are certain critical mistakes where it will mess up the prayer. It'll break the prayer in some cases if you don't correct it straight away, for example. So if there's major mistakes that are kufri mistakes, that you're sending people of paradise to hell, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا مِنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ مُشْرِكِينَ فِي نَارِ جَهَنَّمَ خَالِدِينَ فِيهَا, which is talking about the disbelievers and saying أُولَٰئِكَ أَصْحَابُ الْجَنَّةِ, that they people of paradise, or إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, and then you make them into أَصْحَابُ النَّارِ. That's a critical mistake. And while some would say your salat is broken, you actually have to repeat it. Right? There are other views that say that if you correct it straight away, then in a Tarawih prayer they let it go, or minimum correct it in the next Rakaat. But there are differing views, and if your Imam or the scholars there follow the stricter view, then you'll just have to repeat the prayer. If you make such critical mistakes, most mistakes aren't that critical, but they could be. Sometimes minor mistakes, if they're both ulama, the people who are reading, they'll let it go, they'll just correct it later, they'll tell you in between 4 rakats and you can correct it later. You do want to eventually get a correct Qur'an being read. Okay? Eventually you do want that. You don't want to leave so many mistakes in the way and you don't correct anything. What about if you're a Hafiz class teacher and you're used to listening to people and then behind you say, no, oh, that would break your prayer. Or if you were the Imam and you're reading and then, no, that's wrong. Right? Because that's what you usually do. Right? So try to avoid, if you said even oh, no, your prayer would break. You as an Imam, your prayer would break. If you're the Muqtadi, his prayer would break. Whoever said it. If the Imam's prayer breaks, everybody's breaks. That's the problem. If you're behind and you say that, your prayer breaks, not everybody else's. So be careful of that. I've had a case, I've done I've done Taraweeh in America for multiple years, and there were people behind me from another madhab who used to open the Qur'an and read. And for them it's okay as long as they do it without major movement and things like that, but it was posed a major challenge for me because in the Hanafi madhab, the strong view is that their prayer breaks if they were to read from outside, which means from a mushaf. That means if they corrected me from the Qur'an and I took it, my prayer breaks. So I've told them multiple times, but then sometimes there's just, again, some trigger-happy people who don't do sabr and they just take the mistake out. What do you do in that situation? Now what they usually say is that if you know, and again, inshallah, in many of the masajid here you won't have that challenge, but one way to deal with that is that you listen to what they say and don't take it straight away. You then kind of repeat in your mind from before, and then you come to your own. Maybe because of that prompting, but not directly, you could justify it that way. Right? You could maybe justify it that way and carry on. That's one way to deal with that. Now remember, if you do make a mistake, you can correct it in another Rakaat. Somebody else can correct it. The next reader can correct it. It doesn't have to be the same person correcting it. However, do correct it. There are some who have raised an objection that, sometimes what happens is that if you made a mistake yesterday, 2 small mistakes, so what you do is next day, there's some huffaz, at the beginning they read just those verses, one verse from, one quarter, and then another, and then they start today's. Like, what are you doing? They wonder, like, why you bringing these little verses and then you're reading today's juz or something. And they think that that's bid'ah or something. However, and I'm going to mention this because a lot of people don't know about this. According to Majmu' al-Fatawa, there's a whole discussion on this there. He says that قد كانوا بمكة يوكلون رجلا يكتب ما ترك الإمام من الحروف وغيرها فإذا كان ليلة الختمة أعاده. That in Mecca, meaning somebody should correct what they've made as a mistake, like a little verse and the mistake in there, because in Mecca they had actually appointed a guy to sit on the side, and or not necessarily sit, but after every, he's a hafid, if he couldn't take the mistake wasn't taken out, he would actually write down the mistakes. And then on the night of the 27th, 29th, whenever they finish in the Qur'an, they would actually go through all of them first. You don't want to do that. That would be a lot to go through, most likely, right? And then you only make one mistake. So try to do it by the next day or the next Rakaats. So that's there. And also, from the Hanbalis, it says that قال الأصحاب كأبي محمد, Abu Muhammad, he says وإنما استحب ذلك لتتم الختمة ويكمل الثواب. This is mustahab to repeat and finish off those small verses, just so the khatam, meaning the completion of the Qur'an, can be finished and the reward be fully received. فقد جعل أهل مكة وأحمد وأصحابه إعادة المنسي من الآيات وحده يكمل الختم والثواب وإن كان قد أخل بالترتيب هنا. That they, the people of Mecca, Imam Ahmad and his colleagues and his students, they said that you should repeat the forgotten parts separately to complete the Qur'an and the khatam, even though it does spoil and disrupt the arrangement, right? Because next day you're reading something else and you're just taking a verse from the beginning of yesterday's juz, for example. It does do that a bit, but that's fine. And he says that this is what has been transmitted from Ali radiallahu anhu, أنه نسي آية من سورة. He once forgot a verse, missed a verse from one surah. ثم في أثناء القراءة, then in the middle of his qira'ah, in the middle of his reading, he repeated it. وعاد إلى موضعه, and then he went back to repeating, to reading where he was originally. Mostly people won't know because they're not hafiz, they don't know what's going on, right? But he said you should do that. Now, so hopefully that's clear now about that discussion. The last point in this discussion is, if you're praying at home, you're leading at home, and it's just, there's women folk and they're hafiz, your mother's hafiz, your sister's hafiz of the Qur'an, then can they correct you? So yes, they can correct you. If there's nobody strange there, like everybody is just immediate family, right, mahrams, then they can actually correct you loudly. If there are somebody else and there's a woman who figures it out, she just has to clap. She's not allowed to correct in front of stranger men, right? So she kind of claps to show that there's been a mistake. And of course she can tell afterwards as well. But if you're praying with your family, then your mother, your sister, daughter can correct you. Okay, so that's our qira'ah, your reading stuff done. The last, it's not the last section, but the next section is 14 points of mistakes of the actual prayer now, and Sajdah Sahw. Okay, so let's go through this quickly. You should know a lot of this. Are you allowed to recite Qur'an in sujood or in tashahud when you're sitting down just to prepare for the next? You're not allowed, right? It's not allowed. In fact, if you do in tashahud, you start reading the next, وَجَعَلْنَا مِن بَيْنِ أَيْدِيهِمْ سَدًّا وَمِنْ خَلْفِهِمْ, and you essentially forgot the tashahud, that you didn't read at-tahiyyatu lillah, you'll have to do a Sajdah Sahw. Alright? If you read just a bit in any of them, you've not really delayed too much, then you'd be okay, but you don't want to do that. It's still makruh to do that. Okay? So you shouldn't be reading Qur'an in anywhere other than the standing posture. Okay, what happens if the Imam in his second rakat, but he stood up into a third rakat? Tarawih is 2-2-2. So what do you do in that case? Well, of course, I would doubt that most of the time people do catch you out because there's somebody concentrating. But in the case where nobody's concentrating, you do 3 rakats. Now, listen carefully here. As soon as you find out that this is the 3rd rakat, then go and sit down. Straight away, just sit down. Allahu Akbar, sit down. Right? And then do Sajdah Sahw and finish the prayer. Why do you do Sajdah Sahw? Because you've delayed the sitting by standing up. Okay? That's simple. If you didn't remember and you did ruku, then you remembered, you can still sit back down. You still got a chance to sit back down. You stood up from ruku, you can still sit back down if you remember now. You did a sajda. As soon as you've done a sajda, now you can't sit back down. Because now that is the next rak'ah. Done. You've done a 3rd rakat now. In this case now do a 4th rakat because there's no 3 sunnah rakat prayer. So there's no point finishing on 3. Do it 4. Just carry on reading, do 4. That'll be 4 rakats, right? You don't have to repeat that or anything. Yeah. In that case, you've done 4 rakats of Taraweeh together. You don't want to do this on purpose, okay? It's against the normal recommendation and the, However, sometimes they allow women to do this at home. So that's the way you could save it. You can't do a 3 rakat sunnah prayer. Only Maghrib and Witr are 3. There's no sunnah that is 3 or 1 rakat. So you do 4. Okay? The next option is, so that's clear, right? But you have to do Sajdah Sahw at the end. The next option is that you sat down after 1 rakat. Happens a lot of the time because you're really confused. You're doing so many rakats, you think it's, usually it happens if you've made a mistake in how much you've read and you've gone to the next one and you're so trained to do ruku at this point or something like that. You sat down in first rakat, tahiyyat, and then somebody said Subhanallah, or you remembered. Now it depends on how far you remember. If you remembered within the time it takes to say Subhanallah, Subhan Rabbil Azim 3 times, then you could just get back up and carry on as normal and finish as normal, no problem. That much delay is tolerated, less than that. But if you sat for Subhan Rabbil A'la, Subhan Rabbil A'la, Subhan Rabbil A'la, now you've delayed the standing. So you would still stand, but then you have to do Sajdah Sahw at the end because you've delayed. Okay? So I think that's done. Now, what happens if you broke a prayer or the prayer broke because you made a major mistake and didn't change it? So you have to repeat that. Or you did 3 rakats and stopped. Or you did 1 rakat and done salam as well, mashallah. That means whatever you read in that 1 rakat, is that counted? Because at the end you have to finish the whole Qur'an off in the Taraweeh as well. So is that 1 rakat qiraat counted or not? Or you did 3 rakats, does that reading count? There's 2 views about it. Some say it's okay because everybody's heard it. They've heard a reading. However, it's not been in Taraweeh because those rakats were spoilt. So best to always do it again. Because that's the better view. That's the more sounder view, that you just have to do it again. It's going to take another 5-7 minutes of Taraweeh for that day. You might listen to a few things, but it happens, right? It happens once or twice in Ramadan. It's okay, right? And it's sunnah to finish 1 khatam. That's why. It's sunnah to finish 1 khatam in Taraweeh. We learned that from Umar radiallahu anhu. In some places what they do is, to try to save time, they do that and then they do some in Witr as well. Right? And some in Esha as well. It's not the best way to do it. Right? But it's better than nothing. But it's not the way to do it. That's not the way we do it. And if you missed Durood Sharif, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad, it won't spoil the prayer, but it will be deficient. Right? You don't want to miss those on purpose, like at-tahiyyat, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. You don't want to do that. Right? You need to do those. And where to do Sajdah Sahw, there's multiple places to do Sajdah Sahw. I'm not going to go through all of that. It's essentially where you do Sajdah Sahw is if you delay a fard of the prayer, or you delay a wajib of the prayer, or you miss a wajib of the prayer. Those 3 are the places where you do Sajdah Sahw. Now, I can't go through that list right now, but you can find that in these books in Ta'lim al-Haq. So do go through those so that you know whether you have to do Sajdah Sahw or not. You know when you're supposed to do 2 rakats and you stood up into the 3rd by mistake? Because you've stood up fully, that means you've stood up, you've delayed. So that means you'd have to do Sajdah Sahw even if you sit back down. If you stood up half, in a way that you're closer to sitting and your back is not fully straight, right? Or it's still kind of bowing, and you just stood up a bit, you can sit down, no problem. But if you kind of are more closer to standing, it's like you've stood up. Right? If you started Fatiha silently, you thought it was, I don't know, some other namaz, and you, alhamdulillah. If it's less than 3 verses, you're fine. You can just start being loud. But if it's more than 3 verses, you have to do Sajdah Sahw. Right? Likewise, if you had started and then you were so nervous about your hifz, you forgot Fatiha and you just jumped into the next Qur'an reading and you read, you can do Sajdah Sahw. You can go back, read Fatiha and then read that. You have to do Sajdah Sahw if it's 3 verses there, right? In that one as well. Meaning 3 short verses, otherwise 1 long verse. It's massive 3 verses, you can't wait for that. Just that much. And you know, if you made a mistake or you're confused and you stay silent. Now remember this, if you stay silent, nobody's saying anything, and you stay silent for 3 subhanallah, you'd have to do Sajdah Sahw, because in standing you can't be silent for more than that. For less than that, it's okay. So what should you do? If you do get confused and you're just repeat something under your breath, read something under your breath. That would justify it. Even if you're not reading aloud, read something under your breath so that you're not pausing fully for 3 subhanallahs. Alright? And let's just finish this point off. Should you announce Sajdah Tilawat that in the first or the second rakat we're going to do a Sajdah Tilawat? Should you announce it or not? Who says yes? Who says no? It just depends on your masjid. I wouldn't get people used to doing that. In the masjids I've read, or we've read, we just do it. They should know that you do Sajdah. Just do your, you know what? Usually for ruku you say Allahu Akbar. If you are going to go in sajda, you know, the Sajdah Tilawat, just say Allahu Akbar. So that people know that this is a special sajda and you're not going into ruku. Alright? So it's up to you. You can announce it if you want. That's fine if that's what you do. But then one day you forget, there's going to be confusion. So I just get them used to not doing it. But that's up to you. Sajdah Tilawat needs to be done within about 3 verses. So if you've read the Sajdah Tilawat verse and finished it, up to where it says the Sajdah, and then you read another verse, you still have an opportunity to go in and do a special sajda for it, up to about 3 or 4 verses. I'm not going to go into full detail of that right now, but what I want to mention is that some of you may know that if instead of a special sajda, you just did the ruku of the salat, then that would be acceptable. And if not that, then when you go into sajda of the salat itself and you didn't do a special sajda for the sajda verse you read, then that would still be done. However, I would advise that you don't do that because there's more reward of doing a special sajda. Also, everybody doesn't know that it will get done by the sajda of the prayer, and you have just learnt it in your first year of the alim course or something, and you go and you try that in your masjid and everybody will then jump on you. It just causes a huge confusion. However, it's superior to do a special sajda because you're doing an extra sajda, so that has to be superior. Also, just to clarify that when you go into ruku and you want to do that as part of the ruku, if you're praying alone, that's fine because your intention is to do a sajda, that it'd be fine for you. But if you as the imam are intending your Sajdah Tilawat to be completed by your ruku, all of your followers have to have the same intention. And they're not going to have that intention. They're going to be confused, to be honest. So then it won't be done for them. So that's why never do it in ruku. Just do a special one. I know sometimes it's a bit awkward. You do that, you come back and you say, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْأَنْفَالِ قُلِ الْأَنْفَالُ لِلَّهِ وَالرَّسُولِ, and you read a few verses and you go back down. But that's still probably the better way to do it. You know, we have a little rest after every 4 rakats. What do you read in that? So in many masjids they have the tasbih of Taraweeh. Subhana dhil mulki wal malakut, Subhana dhil izzati wal azamati wal kibriya wal jabarut. Now technically there's nothing wrong with reading that, but that's not the sunnah dua to read. You can literally read anything during that time. Any tasbih, any dua. In Makkah, they used to actually do tawaf. In Medina Munawwara, they would do another 4 rakats, or 2 or 4 rakats. That's why their Taraweeh came out to be 36 rakats sometimes, because they have long. We don't have that kind of long pause anyway. So you can read anything. You can do a dua in that time or whatever you want to read. Also, if you do see, and it's not your job necessarily, but a lot of the masjids that have this Subhana Dhil Mulki wal Mulk, they have a major mistake in there that you have to check that you're not doing. Subhana Dhil Izzati wal Azamati. Azamati, which means the possessor of grandeur and majesty and might. They usually have it written as Azmati with a sukoon. Azmatun means a bone. So the one of bones. It's a major mistake. Lots of places have they've got the traditional setup, right? So that needs to be corrected. But again, that you can leave that to the Imam. Otherwise, you can read anything during that time. Right, let's go on to the Witr now. That's the next section, is about the Witr. Okay? Now, the Hanafi position on the Witr is that it needs to be 3 rakats done all together with 1 salam and a tashahhud in between. Okay? That's the standard. So, if you're in a masjid where they want you to do 2 and 1, are you allowed to do that? As a Hanafi, you can't. What I would do in that case, I'll say, okay, let's have a Shafi Imam to do 2 and 1, and I'll just do mine separately. So try to find a way to accommodate, but as a Hanafi, you can't do 2 and 1. Yes, there's some ulama who've allowed that to be done in Saudi, in the Haram, where they say, okay, fine, pray behind the Imam. There's various views there, but that's as far as it goes usually. Okay, another challenge that could come about is that we do Dua ul-Qunut in our Witr. And in Taraweeh time, in Ramadan, it's sunnah and it's recommended to do Witr in Jama'ah, and not outside of Ramadan. That's why we do it in Ramadan. Now, I've been in a congregation before that they wanted a loud dua. And in our madhab, it's superior to do a silent dua. Allahumma inna nasta'inuka. You raise your hand, Allahu Akbar, and then you do the dua ul-Qunut. And then after that, we do ruku and sajda, right? So, can you do, we usually say that our position is the stronger position, that the dua needs to be done silently. Okay? Now, I was on one occasion in our masjid, they actually wanted it differently. So I said, let's have somebody else lead it, and they can do it loud. They can do 3 together, but they can do a loud dua because they're allowed to do that. So usually that's what we do, and then there's some other options as well that we came up with at the time. But another thing that happens in Esha, the Imam does a slow qira'ah. In Taraweeh, they do fast qira'ah. Come back to Witr, it's like everybody's got time now, so they do slow qira'ah again. I just don't understand that. They rush you in Taraweeh. When it comes to Witr, it just kind of slows it down again. I don't understand why. Is there a reason for that? So, I'm not saying do it fast. But I'm saying that if you are in a hurry, in the sense that there's shorter nights, alhamdulillah, the nights are getting longer anyway, then I don't see any special reason to do Witr slower than the Taraweeh. Meaning, if you were doing the Taraweeh as well as the Witr, you can do the Witr in the same speed as your Taraweeh. The whole thing should be decent and moderate anyway, Witr and Taraweeh. But there's no special sunnah to make the Witr slower than the Taraweeh. Do you understand? That I don't understand. Another thing that you should try to do is to announce that it's Witr prayer. Because usually, after Taraweeh, in many masajid, they have dua. So the last reader of Taraweeh, they do a dua. Now that dua is not necessarily established from the early days that they had a dua there. However, it's an occasion to do, that people want to use it, so that's why the Imam does dua. But it's not necessary. In my masjid, I used to do dua after the Witr. Right? So it's not necessary, but there's no harm in doing dua there. So what happens usually is that when people get up, they might think it's Taraweeh again. So that's why it's a good idea sometimes to announce Salatul Witri, Yarhamukumullah. The Salat of Witr, may Allah have mercy on you. It's just helpful so that people don't make the wrong intention and they realize you're in Witr afterwards and they think they're in Taraweeh in the beginning. Now finishing Taraweeh, we've already discussed, this is the next section, finishing Taraweeh, we've already discussed what day to finish it on. It doesn't really, it's not necessary to finish on certain days. It's up to you, whatever's convenient, however much you want to read, and so on and so forth. However, a question does arise is that after you finish your Qur'an, on the 27th, 29th, and there's a 30th day maybe, or there's days left, what do you read in that? Is it fard to read Alam Tara Kayfa to the end? No. That's just easy, that's why people do it. It's just easy, that's why people do it. Otherwise, you could read from anywhere. You could take Surah Al-Rahman, break that up, split that up, read that, Surah Al-Waqi'. You could read anything. You can start another Qur'an for next year. Say, we'll just start another Qur'an for next year. I'm just joking, don't do that. Right? But you can read whatever you want, just so that you know. Right? Again, just don't, people expect it to be a bit slow. I mean, I've been in communities where you get the most people in the last few days. Because they're like, Ramadan's ending, we need to value it. But the tradition in other places that I see locally is that they've done Qur'an now, it's just holiday now. So it's just whatever we're reading now is bonus, so keep it as short as possible, but you don't need to do that. Are you allowed to take money for Taraweeh? Are you allowed to take a gift for Taraweeh to do Taraweeh? I see some head shaking that, of course, that's what we do it for. There's a massive difference of opinion. The traditional opinion in many of the fatwa books from the Indian subcontinent was that it's not allowed. So I used to go around the world, but I never, I didn't take money for Taraweeh. I was like very strict about it, even though they were insisting. So if you are in a place where you're doing Taraweeh, plus you have to do other prayers, or you have to give lectures, or so on, then technically you could tell them, look, if you're going to pay me, then pay me for this stuff. I don't want to take for Taraweeh. Why can you not take? Why do those ulama say you can't take Taraweeh? I'm not going to go into a full-fledged discussion here. They say because Taraweeh, to read full Qur'an is not necessary in Taraweeh. And in the Hanafi school, it was originally not even permitted to take payments for leading the prayer, for teaching children. These are all worships. Why should you charge for that? But then they realized that if we're not going to pay, then people have to earn a living. There's no longer people who look after such imams and teachers. So that's why they said it's okay to take. But according to need. Now Taraweeh, they're saying that if somebody wants to come and lead Taraweeh, great. But otherwise we'll just read without the full Qur'an. So it's not an obligation, they say. That's their kind of understanding. The other group, which I think has a sound view as well, is that absolutely fine to receive a payment for it. Of course, you should not be doing it for that purpose. But if somebody wants to give you, then it's okay. However, even those who say it's not permissible, then that would be like if it was under contract. That I'm going to do Taraweeh and I'm going to charge you £1,000 or £200 or whatever it is, right? If an individual came and gave you money, or a few individuals without anybody telling them, they put some money together themselves and came and give you can accept that. That nobody would say that. Even those who say it's not allowed to take money for Taraweeh, they'd be fine with that. Because that's just not done. What they would not be fine with, the first group, is where they make an announcement, we're going to collect for the Huffaz. And it just looks really weird, to be honest. Like, alhamdulillah, I've never had that done to me, but I've talked to people where you're sitting there and they're literally collecting money for you as though you're some faqir. Right? That sounds like really weird. Right? If they were to just pay you like that without doing that, then that would probably be more sound according to the second view as well. Right? So I hope, I don't want to talk more about that, but I hope that clarifies. Okay, that's our, that's done for what I had prepared. And it's possible that some issues I covered quickly. I may have rushed some issues. I may have not thoroughly discussed all issues because I can't have all issues in my mind. So now what we'll do is we will move on to your questions. So I've got questions online and I've got questions from our brothers here. So let's take your questions or clarifications on any of the issues. Go ahead. So if in Salat you eat anything or ingest anything that is more than the size of like half a pea or something like that, like if there's something stuck in your teeth and it was just like for example, if it was this big, that would break your prayer. If it was like a very small portion, maybe like that much, I don't know if you can see that, that probably wouldn't. If it was stuck in your teeth and it came out and dislodged and you ate it, then it wouldn't break your prayer. Likewise, if you had bubble gum and it still had flavor in there, and then that mixed with your saliva and went down, it's a foreign substance going down. That will break your prayer. If the chewing gum, you don't want to do this, but if the chewing gum was totally, like you were really like finished it off, there was no flavor in there at all, and you left it in your mouth, there was no flavor, still be makruh to have kept it in your mouth, but it won't break because no flavor going down. So with honey, if there's enough in you, just drank it, then you Allahu Akbar, and there's honey going down your throat from the rest of your mouth, that would be a problem. Right. One good suggestion is that for those of you who are in school or work, you've got your lunch breaks, which you can't have lunch in. So rather than doing anything else, it's a good time to actually catch up on your reading, and you could probably do a lot during that time. Do you need to make a verbal intention when you are leading women? No. It can in fact, no intention is verbal. Intention is to do with the mind. So even your intention to leading prayer, you don't have to have an intention in the sense that you don't have to verbalize anything, but you do have to have an intention that you're doing 2 rakats of this prayer, of 2 rakats of Taraweeh prayer. But all of that doesn't have to be verbalized. It's in your mind, and that's enough, as long as you're conscious of what you're doing. You're not automatic pilot when and you don't know what you're doing. Most people don't do that anyway. But yeah, you don't have to verbalize any intention, by the way. Okay, so if you break your wudhu, in your ruku, in your sajda, wherever you do it, just say you'll have to basically tap the person behind you. So if they're in ruku, you just basically kind of hold the person by the shoulder or arm and just bring him forward. And as I say, this is something that should be known. So if somebody does that to you, you will go forward and just carry on. So the guy will move forward, say Sami Allahu liman hamida, and carry on. In sajda, he'd obviously have to make a movement because he's in sajda, and you'll have to he won't be able to crawl forward or something. So there'll be some movement in there. What happens if you ended up doing just one sujood? If you ended up just doing one sujood, that means there's 2 sujood fard, right? In every rak'at. And you only done one, that means you've missed the fard. If you didn't make it up, your salat will be invalid because you've missed the fard. So what you do is you do an extra sajda. In the next rakat, like if you stand up and you realize if you've stood up for the second rakat and you've realized I've only done one sujood for the first rakat. So when you go back down for the second rakat, you just do an extra sajda there, third sajda. If it was after the second, if it was you missed it in your second rakat and now you're sitting down, then just do a sajda. Just say Allahu Akbar and go into sajda. And then come back and do the read and then do Sajdah Sahw again. Okay, any other questions? Yes?
Does kissing the teeth break a salat?
Kissing your teeth. How do you kiss your teeth? Oh, you mean, what do you call that? Is that kissing your teeth? Huh? Yeah, does that break? If it makes a sound, it will break. If it's done like if you did it that way, that's a sound. That's definitely a sound, isn't it? It's 2 huruf. That's 2 letters. That's like 2 letters. So that probably would break it. It means saying that behind somebody. You're the Imam. Like an exasperated. Yeah, that would probably break it. What is the best way to review daily throughout the year for a hafiz, and how much? At least 1 juz. The optimal is that if you can do 3 juz a day, you'll never have a problem. Otherwise, at least 1 juz, preferably by reading to someone, because then you even get corrected. If not that, then throughout your sunnahs and nafil prayers of the day, that's easy to do and maintain it. But you have to start straight after Ramadan. If you wait and take a big holiday, then it gets rusty and then it gets more difficult. If not in your prayer, then just do it like that. Just read 1 juz. Try to build it into a routine, like if you're traveling on the tube, you're traveling by car, or sometime like that. Otherwise, if you can actually sit and do it first thing, before Fajr, after Fajr, that would be the best thing. What should be done if the mic system crashes and the portion of the congregation loses contact with the Imam? They can complete their prayer. For you just do whatever you can. There's nothing you can do, but it's for the people behind. They just can complete their prayer. And as long as they're not going to do anything before the Imam, it's fine. They'll just do it later. So they just slow it down and they'll just finish off. But that's why masjid should always have a backup mic. You should never rely on one mic. You should always have, because this is everything for us, especially in Friday. Will your stomach rumbling break your salat? That stomach rumbling does not break your salat. However, if you're letting off wind, it will. I want to mention that sometimes people have a rumbling in the intestine. And I've talked to a doctor about this, and they said that if it's internal and there's nothing coming out, and it's an internal kind of, because there's a constant movement there and there's movements of gases internally just moving from one place to another, that won't break the wudhu. But if there's any exit of it, then it will break. They usually say by an exiting sound or smell. Yes. Ibn Abidin and others mention the utility of shorter recitations in Taraweeh. Is this the dominant Hanafi opinion? That's not necessarily the dominant Hanafi opinion. However, when there are shorter days, then some masjids can have that for making life easy, right? For people who can't do the full one. However, if they're all doing that and there's no Qur'an, then that means you're going to be missing a big sunnah. So you don't want to miss it completely, right? And where you can, we insist on that. I've seen cases in many places, like I went to another country and I was told to actually do my Taraweeh in a very particular mosque. I went to that masjid about 15 minutes before Taraweeh. For about 15-20 minutes before Taraweeh, they were sitting there doing Witr, right? Certain adhkar that they had, and they were all doing it. Then they did Taraweeh from Wudhu till the end. In between the 4 Rakaats, they did adhkar. They finished Taraweeh and then they did another set of adhkar. And I was just surprised that Ramadan is the month of the Qur'an. Why didn't they just do a Qur'an khatam? I'm not against dhikr, we love dhikr, but the Qur'an is everything in Ramadan. Our mashayikh, they used to decrease other things to read more Qur'an, other optional worships. So as far as possible, you want to complete a Qur'an khatam. Right? That has been our tradition. Yes, there's leeways in some cases for certain people who can't pray or don't have much time, and there's a night is short. Yes, that's could be accommodated. But the dominant is that you should do it. For the point made earlier about how large the impurity would have to be to invalidate your salah, is this for when the impurity has been discharged during salah? No, discharging impurity in salat will break your wudhu. Discharging impurity breaks your wudhu. This is if there was some remnant left of it on underwear or something, then up to that much is tolerable, right? The 4 centimeter diameter or something. But no, if you are discharging in salat, your wudhu will be broken. What if the masjid you are leading starts Ramadan a day before you? Well, if you chose that masjid, you can just go with the Taraweeh, right? You're not going to do any less, right? You're just... that part you can just read again sometime. If you think that it wasn't done in Ramadan, you can just read it again. Right? That does create other confusions, but at the end of the day, for you, that might have been done before Ramadan. You just do that part again in Ramadan for yourself. What is the ruling on rolling up sleeves mid-arm? You should not roll up sleeves. Just wear something with shorter sleeves if you can't. If you've got like some itching or some issue, but you don't want to roll up sleeves, that's makruh to do so in prayer. I think that's all the questions that we have online. Any more questions here? If somebody's saving the beard. Shaving. It's makruh. Because they say that, the way that the understanding is that if you shave your beard openly, it means that you've done an open sin, right? Especially in the Hanafi school. So that means anybody who does open sin should not be leading the prayer. It's makruh. Salat Tarawih will be fine, will be valid though, right? Even Jummah will be valid behind a sinner as well, right? An open sinner as well. But it's makruh to make such a person the imam. That's the complication.
One more is to hold the wind
to hold the wind. The ulama are right that if you hold wind or you hold going to the toilet and you're struggling, it's makruh. It's usually makruh to do that. If it's easy and you can hold, then that should be okay. But if you shouldn't, because it's distracting. So there's one sajda which is at the end of Suratul Hajj, end of the 17th juz.
which is not a Hanafi place for sajda. However, it's good that if you can read that verse and then go into ruku and sajda of the salat. So you kind of time it so that you can do a ruku and sajda. That will then be done in the sajda at least. We can't do a special sajda for that because it's not a Hanafi one. It's a Shafi'i, it's according to the Shafi'is, so that's why you'll do that. So you don't want to do Sajdah Tilawat in ruku at all anyway, because there's just confusion in that. Anyway. Alhamdulillah. We are done. May Allah bless all of your Taraweehs, all of our Taraweehs, inshaAllah, and allow this sunnah to continue. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept it. Was there anything else, miss? Alhamdulillah, Jazakallah khair, Allah Ta'ala bless it. Allah Ta'ala bless us and illuminates us with the Qur'an and raise us with the Qur'an and bless us with the Qur'an. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. The point of a lecture is to encourage people to act, to get further, an inspiration, an encouragement, persuasion. The next step is to actually start learning seriously, to read books, to take on a subject of Islam and to understand all the subjects of Islam, at least at their basic level, so that we can become more aware of what our deen wants from us. And that's why we started Rayyan courses, so that you can actually take organized lectures on demand whenever you have free time, especially, for example, the Islamic Essentials course that we have on there, the Islamic Essentials Certificate, which you take 20 short modules. And at the end of that, inshallah, you will have gotten the basics of most of the most important topics in Islam, and you'll feel a lot more confident. You don't have to leave lectures behind. You can continue to leave, to listen to lectures, but you need to have this more sustained study as well. Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.